In this video, we're going to look at how the equilibrium price and quantity of goods changes due to supply curve shifts. Notice here that I already have drawn a supply and demand for the corn market. And our first question says, fertilizer price falls. How does that change the equilibrium price and quantity of corn? Remember, fertilizer is an input into corn production, so if the price of fertilizer falls, then the cost of producing corn falls. And when that happens, we have an increase in supply, and I'll depict that like this. This is an increase in supply. And we move from one equilibrium at the old supply and demand to the new equilibrium at the new supply curve and the old demand curve. And what we've done is jump from one equilibrium to another. And with this increase in supply, we would see that the equilibrium price falls, because again we're going from this higher price to a lower price. And we should see the equilibrium quantity rise, because we're going from a smaller quantity to a lower quantity, just as we expect. If the cost of producing something falls, if the cost of producing something falls, we naturally expect both the price to fall and the quantity to rise. For our second question, we're going to ask, what happens if government taxes fertilizer purchases? You may know that when we apply fertilizer, there's always some fertilizer that leaves the fields, enters waters, and pollutes it. So fertilizer use does cause water pollution, and maybe government wants to tax it to decrease the amount of pollution that takes place. Well, we would naturally think that the cost of producing corn would rise if it costs more to buy the fertilizer. So we'd have a decrease in supply, and we go from an old equilibrium to a new equilibrium, which is at a higher price and a lower quantity. So we see that the equilibrium price rises and equilibrium quantity falls. For number 3, we're going to suppose that we're looking at the supply and demand of grass-fed beef. Now, some people think grass-fed beef saves carbon, so it's good for global warming, and that we should subsidize grass-fed beef to counter global warming and reduce carbon emissions. If that is true, and farmers are now given a subsidy for producing grass-fed beef, then the cost of producing grass-fed beef falls, and we have a supply increase, and we go from old equilibrium to a new equilibrium that's at a lower price and higher quantity. We've thus far looked at 2 cases where supply increases, and we saw in both cases when supply increases that the price falls and the quantity rises, and that's always true with the supply increase. For question 4, we're going to say we're looking at barley. There's a supply and there's a demand for barley, and we're going to say what happens if there's a drought that decreases the supply of barley. Well, we just have a supply decrease. Supply curve shifts to the left. We go from one equilibrium to a new equilibrium, which is at a higher price and a lower quantity. So we see equilibrium price rise, equilibrium quantity fall. And whenever we see a decrease in supply, we always find that that's going to increase price and decrease quantity. For number 5, I'm going to give you a demand and supply curve. And there they are right there. And when I plot these curves, I get this demand curve right here. And then I get the supply curve right here. And the equilibrium is going to be where the 2 curves cross, so I know that my equilibrium price is 7. And my equilibrium quantity is 3. But now something changes. In red over here, we've got a new supply curve. The new intercept of the supply curve is 4, and the slope remains 2. I'm going to come over here and trace this new supply curve out now. So I'm starting at 4 right here with a slope of 2. It's going to look something like this. That is my new supply curve. And of course what we want to ask is this an increase or decrease in supply, and how does the equilibrium price and quantity change? Our new equilibrium is at 8 for price and 2 for quantity. We're going to write new equilibrium here, and that new equilibrium is at a price of 8 and a quantity of 2. And our old equilibrium is already down here. So we see that price has gone up by 1 and quantity has gone down by 1. We went from this equilibrium to that equilibrium. Price went up by 1, quantity went down by 1. And because quantity went down, we say that this is a decrease in supply.